You probably have some idea of how animals communicate. A bark, a growl, maybe a purr. Pretty simple stuff, right?
Usually seems that way.
But what if I told you that our close relatives, the bonobos, might be putting together vocalizations in ways that are surprisingly similar to how we construct sentences?
It's really quite something. And what's truly fascinating is this new research that's making us rethink, well, what makes human language so unique?
Right.
We're diving into a study here from the University of Zurich and Harvard University, and it's found evidence of something called compositionality in how bonobos use their voices.
Compositionality. Okay, let's unpack that a bit.
Yeah.
It basically means combining smaller pieces that have their own meaning to create a larger meaning. Think of it like building with Legos, maybe.
That's a great analogy. The researchers gave a simple example. Blonde dancer.
Okay.
You get that picture immediately, right? Someone with blonde hair who dances. Simple combination.
Yeah, straightforward. The meaning is just the sum of the parts.
Exactly. But then they contrasted that with something like bad dancer. Now, the meaning of bad changes how we understand dancer in a more complex way. It's not just adding bad to dancer,
Right, it modifies it. It's not just additive. That's a key difference.
It really is.
And that difference between the simple adding and the more complex modification, that's really key to what we're exploring today.
Absolutely.
So our mission, is to understand how this new research on bonobo communication challenges our ideas about the very origins of language itself.
Yeah, where did it all start?
We're talking about those first steps towards complex communication. And, well, it turns out we might have more in common with bonobos than we ever realized.
And it's thanks to some really dedicated scientists observing them out in the wild in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Right, not in a lab.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The study took place in the Kokolapori Community Reserve, so they were watching wild bonobos interacting naturally.
That context seems really important.
It is, and we even get to think about specific bonobos, like individuals named Mia and Olive, whose calls actually contributed to these really interesting findings.
So Mia and Olive are out there talking. But how do you even begin to figure out what a bonobo is trying to say? They don't exactly sit down for a grammar lesson.
Yeah, no, they don't. And that's where the first really clever part of the research comes in. They essentially set out to create what they called a bonobo dictionary.
Dictionary?
Yeah. They adapted methods used in linguistics, the study of human language, techniques that help us understand the meaning of our words, and they applied them to the entire range of bonobo vocalizations.
Wow. So it was like they were painstakingly listening to all the different sounds bonobos make in all sorts of different situations and trying to figure out, okay, what does this sound tend to mean?
That's the essence of it. The lead researcher, Melissa Berthed, described it as aiming for a complete list of bonobo calls and their meaning.
A complete list.
And what's truly remarkable here, really groundbreaking, is that this is the first time researchers have systematically determined the meaning of calls across the entire vocal repertoire.
A whole thing.
The whole thing. All the different sounds that a particular animal species uses.
That sounds like an absolutely incredible amount of work, just listening and correlating.
It must have been immense. And it wasn't just about understanding single sounds in isolation, right? Because you mentioned something earlier.
Yeah, I remember reading a fascinating example about a quiet peep sound that came before a louder whistle.
Yes. That's a perfect example of how these individual sounds can gain more nuanced meaning when they're put together.
Okay.
The researchers observed that bonobos would sometimes make this subtle peep sound just before a whistle, but specifically in tense social situations.
Tense situations? Like what?
Like when they were maybe making a big display, dragging a branch, something like that.
Yeah.
And that little peep seemed to add something to the whistle, maybe indicating something about the social context or perhaps the bonobo's own internal state in that moment. A layer of meaning.
Huh. So a modifier almost.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. So they've built this foundational dictionary of bonobo sounds and their potential meanings. What was the next step in uncovering this more complex language-like structure?
Right, so having this understanding of individual calls was the key. It allowed them to then investigate something even more fascinating, how bonobos actually combine these calls.
Putting the Legos together.
Exactly. And again, they use a method from linguistics to sort of quantify the relationship between the meaning of a single call and the meaning of those calls when they were used together in sequence.
Okay, measuring the combined meaning versus the individual parts. And when they started looking at these combinations, what did they discover? Did the dictionary hold up?
Well, they found many instances where the meaning of a combined call sequence was directly related to the meanings of the individual calls within it. Ah, okay.
Which is, a fundamental aspect of compositionality, that idea that you can build larger meanings from smaller, meaningful parts. Predictably, almost.
So it's like our blonde dancer example playing out in the bonobo world. Individual sounds coming together to create a combined, understandable meaning. Predictable combination.
In a way, yes, that seemed to be happening. But what was truly striking, the really big finding, was that some of these bonobo call combinations appeared to go beyond that simple addition of meaning. They seemed to resemble those more complex, what we called non-trivial compositional structures that we see in human language.
Non-trivial, like our bad dancer, where one part bad modifies the other dancer rather than just existing side by side. Are you saying bonobos are doing something similar with their vocalizations?
That's the strong implication from the data. The researchers suggest that the ability to create these more complex combinations of calls where one vocalization might actually modify the meaning of another, well, might not be something unique to humans after all. Wow. Okay. That's really making me rethink things, if they can modify meaning like that.
It's a big shift in perspective.
So what does this tell us about how language evolved? I mean, we've often thought that this level of complexity, this modification, was a uniquely human development, the pinnacle almost.
Exactly. That's been the prevailing view for a long time. Now consider this. The last common ancestor that humans and bonobos shared, that goes back quite a way.
How far back are we talking?
Roughly 7 to 13 million years ago.
7 to 13 million years, okay.
So the researchers, including Martin Surbeck from Harvard, they concluded that if bonobos are exhibiting this kind of compositionality now, it likely means that this ability was already present in our common ancestors at least 7 million years ago, if not even earlier.
Whoa. So the capacity to build complex meanings from smaller vocal units isn't some recent innovation just in the human line.
Doesn't look like it.
It has incredibly deep roots in our primate family tree, way, way back.
That's the core message, yeah. This research strongly indicates that the fundamental building blocks for structured, meaningful communication were likely in place long before human language as we know it even emerged.
That's amazing.
As Simon Townsend, a senior author on the study, pointed out, our ancestors were probably already using some form of compositionality in their vocalizations millions of years ago.
This really changes how we look at the origins of language then. It sounds like bonobo vocal communication shares a much deeper connection, a shared history maybe, with our own linguistic abilities than we previously understood.
Absolutely. It suggests the foundations are much older and perhaps more widespread.
Mm.
And if anyone listening wants to dive into the specifics of this fascinating work, it was published in the journal Science.
Right, the big one.
Yeah. We can maybe put the details in the show notes. But you can also search for the work of Melissa Berthay, Simon Townsend, and Martin Surbeck to find the full study. It's really worth a read if you're interested.
Definitely. So let's just quickly recap the main takeaway here. We're seeing solid evidence that bonobos use a form of structured communication, where combining different calls creates nuanced meaning, much like how we combine words to form sentences, especially in those non-trivial ways.
Exactly. This isn't just random noise. There seems to be a real system at play, a structure.
And this discovery pushes back the evolutionary timeline for these language-like traits by potentially millions of years.
Suggesting they have much deeper origins than we ever imagined, really.
This deep dive into bonobo communication really makes you stop and think, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
If the basic building blocks of language, this kind of compositional ability, were already around millions of years before Homo sapiens even existed, well, what does that tell us about the very essence of communication and how we create meaning?
It's a profound question.
Right.
And it leads to another thought for listeners to maybe chew on. What other abilities, what other cognitive capacities might we share with our primate relatives in ways that we are only just beginning to grasp? Perhaps this research is just the first glimpse into a much deeper shared cognitive landscape with the animal kingdom than we currently appreciate.
Yeah, it definitely challenges us to reconsider our place, maybe our uniqueness, in the natural world, especially regarding language. It makes you wonder what other fascinating secrets are hidden within the communication systems of the creatures we share this planet with.
Yeah.
What else are we missing?
Exactly. There's likely so much more to discover.